Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
In a reciprocal fashion, the U.S. government is using this situation as an excuse to base troops abroad in the vicinity of oil resources, 3/4 of which happen to be located in Muslim countries.
We now have permanent bases in Iraq. We've had them in Kuwait for a while. We have permanent bases in Afghanistan. We are building permanent bases in Uzbekistan. We actually have 4 bases in Georgia. So if you draw a map that connects the dots between all of the bases that we have done since the Cold War ended, what you see is American military hegemony covering 90% of the globe's energy resources in terms of gas and in terms of oil.
In May of 2002, trusting that the U.S. military would bring peace for Afghanistan, President Karzai signs a treaty with the leaders of Pakistan and Turkmenistan for the construction of a $2 billion pipeline from Turkmenistan to the Indian Ocean. Turkmenistan and Afghanistan hope to generate much-needed income for their economies. Pakistan hopes to secure an oil route for itself. Its position would also allow Pakistan to control at least part of the oil supply to India. Washington, however, appears to recognize the potential for conflicts with the pipeline that would ultimately serve China's 1.5 billion consumers as well. Indeed, U.S. oil companies are now favoring a western route through the sparsely populated regions of Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and eastern Turkey towards the Mediterranean Sea, and eventually Europe and the United States. For this reason, the U.S. military is not even trying to control the Afghan warlords, whose persistent violence would hamper the pipeline's construction. In addition, continued unrest justifies a large U.S. military presence in Afghanistan that will remain as a deterrent to any other foreign intrusion into the region. Fighting terrorism is clearly not the reason for such a large deployment of troops, as clandestine terrorist cells are better fought by undercover agents and special forces. Is it a coincidence if massive U.S. military positioning happens to take place in Central Asia, the Persian Gulf, and other oil-rich regions of the world? Is fighting terrorism the real motive? Or is Washington more interested in grabbing whatever oil reserves are left, fueling terrorism and war as a result?
Please call us at 1-800-400-4000 or log on to our website, linktv.org. Joining us again now from Stanford University is Dr. James Fearon. Dr. Fearon testified on the conflict in Iraq in September before the U.S. House of Representatives, and in the studio here again is independent journalist Dar Jamail. He's written for The Nation, Mother Jones, and other publications. He spent 8 months in Iraq. In addition to reporting from Iraq, he has also reported from Syria and Lebanon during the Israeli-Lebanon war, and also from Jordan. Dar, let me begin with you. The film we were watching ends up with Afghanistan, not about Iraq, and let me ask you about that. The oil agenda doesn't seem quite as clear, at least not directly clear, in Afghanistan. What do you see as the real U.S. objectives there?
I think Afghanistan, part of that objective is, again, encircling Iran. I think that Iran is the next step in this plan for this administration, as we discussed earlier. But I think also, if you look at where those bases are situated in Afghanistan, they're right along the proposed route of a very important gas pipeline.
Dr. Fearon, let me go back to you and follow up on our discussion before. Some have used the term ethnic cleansing to describe what is going on now in this civil war in Iraq, sort of trying to eliminate the other side. Is that an appropriate characterization in this case?
It does seem that there's been an enormous amount of population movement under threat of killing, threat of force. Not so much, wholesale massacres, although there's been a great deal of assassination and killing going on. But there seems to be an attempt to unmix or gain, get rid of Sunnis and Shia majority neighborhoods and vice versa.
I want to ask you about the U.S. role in supporting the Maliki government there. I think you have described that as morally dubious. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think I was speaking in a context of where the administration's policy, the surge option, tends to go. The Bush administration is still on essentially a kind of stay the course towards victory line, where the idea is we're going to make a success of the Maliki government. What I've been arguing is that where that heads us is in the direction of siding with one side in what's becoming a very vicious civil war, and that's not necessarily, you know, for example, if that involves backing a side that's undertaking essentially a massive ethnic cleansing of Baghdad, that, for example, would be a morally dubious position.
Let me talk to you about, I think you talk about three options in your testimony before Congress. There's the stay the course, of course. There's the so-called troop surge. And you talked about, you used terms like managed withdrawal or gradual troop deployment. What do you mean by those terms?
Gradual withdrawal?
Yeah. Or you also used the phrase a gradual troop redeployment.
Yeah. So I think, you know, sooner or later, probably not under this administration, U.S. troops we're going to draw down in Iraq. And, you know, how that's done, there are lots of different possibilities, you know, ranging from moving them to other places in Iraq, but out of the basically pulling back from the combat zones and disengaging them from combat, to removing them completely, to moving some of them to the Kurdish regional government area, or to some of the Gulf states, or just moving them, you know, out entirely. And, you know, what the best option is going to depend on a lot of, you know, diplomatic, political, military considerations at the time. I think what you're referring to, I was arguing at that time, back in September, against a sudden withdrawal, which I thought at that time would lead to, or could lead to, a really rapid escalation in ethnic cleansing and killing in Baghdad and other parts of Iraq. As time has gone on, I think that argument is weaker as the violence just kind of continues to escalate. It's not clear that a U.S. withdrawal would lead to, it could, but the odds that it would lead to a really massive sudden increase in violence are probably going down.
Do you see, is there a serious concern that this civil war in Iraq could spread to a broader civil sectarian disruption in that area?
I think it's unlikely that we'd see, or at least at present, I don't see any obvious way that it leads to an interstate conflict among states within the region. Although I do think that, you know, continued and increased intervention by neighboring states and the possibility of a proxy war between Iran and some of the Sunni-dominated states to the west is increasingly likely, and it could very well head in that direction.
Dar, you have said, and finally we just have about a minute left here, that the Bush administration won't set a withdrawal timetable because the fact is there are no plans for withdrawal. What do you base that on, and how do you see that playing out then?
I base that on the 2002 National Security Strategy that was updated March '06, and also just the hard physical evidence on the ground in Iraq. If you look at these bases, these are mega bases on the line of what we have in Germany and Japan. How long have those bases been there? Look at this embassy in the middle of Baghdad, the size of the Vatican City, with 21 buildings, room for 3,000 to 8,000 government officials, and a school for their kids. So if you look at the physical evidence on the ground also, there aren't that many, there are no signs of a total withdrawal.
Finally, Dr. Fearon, question for you. Let's think 10 years from now. How do you think historians will look at this period? How big a mistake do you think they will say this was?
Well, in terms of the entry, the decision to go to war, I think it'll, you know, Thomas Rick's title is dead on, you know, a fiasco. It's really been a debacle, one of the, you know, worst set of decisions and execution in the history of U.S. foreign policy. As to what historians will make of what came of it, too soon to say. I mean, the Bush administration really threw the pack of cards up in the air in this region by invading and not having a good plan for the post-war period. The pack of cards is in the air, and how it's going to shake out. We know there are going to be huge long-term effects. What exactly they're going to be, too soon to say.